Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and today we will be putting out a re-release of an old episode with Julie L. Hall about scapegoats. In this episode, the original sound was not very good. Sometimes people try to go back and listen to this episode, and they have a very difficult time to do that. So I did my best to rework the audio, get rid of this weird background noise for everyone. And I think I did an okay job. The sounds of the voices might be a little bit digital sounding in this one, but at least that background noise is not there anymore. And I really enjoyed this. Was one of the early episodes we did. I might not have been the best interviewer at the time. I was doing my best, but I wanted everyone to listen to this episode again. So I got it to a point where I think it is much easier for everyone to hear. So now I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Here is my old conversation about scapegoats with Julie L. Hall. Welcome, everyone, to Narcissist Apocalypse Q&A. And today I have a journalist, an educational writer, a coach, a survivor, and author of the book, The Narcissist in Your Life, Recognizing the Patterns and Learning to Break Free, Julie L. Hall. It's an examination of narcissistic personality disorder and its traumatic impact on family members and partners. It's packed with insight, compassion, and practical strategies for recovery. It's comprehensive, up-to-date, affirming, and it's an accessible guide that will not only help you understand narcissistic abuse trauma, but will also help you overcome trauma cycles and help you move forward with healing. So Julie Hall, thank you for being here with me today.
Hi, Brandon. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And it's a pleasure to have you here, not just because we're going to discuss scapegoating soon, but we're also going to discuss right now all the lovely things some big names have said about you and your book. And we're going to start off here with the Library Journal. And they say all libraries, in particular university collections, supporting mental health and psychiatry curriculum will find this a worthy addition. Then we have Susan Forward, who is a PhD and author of Emotional Blackmail and Mothers Who Can't Love. She says this book provides insight and effective strategies for anyone working to deal with negative effects of a close relationship with a narcissist. It will resonate with adult children and partners struggling with the pain and confusion of life in a war zone that is often invisible to outsiders. Hall's book is an important addition to the understanding of narcissistic personality disorder and destined to help many people. And next we have Margalise Felstad. I think I'm saying that correctly. And she's...
I think you said Margallis.
Margallis. But she's a lot of people will go on to Amazon and see her book. It's a very popular book called Stop Caretaking the Borderline of a Narcissist. You see it everywhere being recommended by everyone. And she says there is a wealth of information here. The lists and examples of narcissistic behaviors and their impact on family members, outlines of family rules and roles, and personal interviews are especially helpful in bringing a deeper understanding of the depth and breadth of narcissistic exploitation and manipulation. And the strategies for family members are practical and compassionate. Hall's The Narcissist in Your Life will give you hope and insight into how to help yourself and your kids heal. And what's important, I think, in this quote is the part about the kids. And, I've read your book and it's very thorough. And a big thing for a lot of people out there when they're going through this process, especially the ones who are co-parenting, and when it comes down to the kids and how you deal with the kids after and what they might be going through as well. So that's an extreme...
really ties in with the scapegoat issue.
Yeah. And we have two more big ones left. Eleanor Greenberg, who is one of the foremost experts in this subject, says, brilliant, riveting, and amazingly thorough. I recommend this book to virtually everyone with an interest in narcissistic personality disorder, including psychotherapists. And then the biggest one of them all, Jackson McKenzie, who wrote the book Psychopath Free,
which is a huge book and helps so many people. And he's recently wrote a whole again. He says, this book is written from the heart. Julie Hall's book is a treasure trove of knowledge and healing. Every page is filled with warmth and compassion, teaching the reader how to find solutions within. So that's a lot of praise.
People were very generous and very nice. Margalis actually wrote the foreword to the book. So that was taken from the foreword.
So I listened to your book through Audible and audiobook, and you had a wonderful narrator there, and I listened to it on my walks to and from work every day. It was an easy listen. And, a lot of the days when I was listening to it, the way, especially when we got to the family oriented stuff, you're dealing with it, because when this has been your life, it's something that's you're always going to carry with you. So it brings you back to those moments. And it really had me thinking a lot of the different members of my family, what everyone's role was. And, especially when it comes to, in my specific family, my brother, I would consider to be the scapegoat of the family. And, even though he might be, because the scapegoat is just a very complicated, everyone in the family is a complicated character. But the scapegoat in particular, would you say is the most complicated of the characters, that it's so complex of what goes on with them?
It is complicated in part because it can take this kind of different form. There are different varieties of scapegoat. And just to sort of back up a little bit, the idea of role came up, was first introduced by Sharon Wegg-Scheider-Crew in her book about alcoholic families. And the role that she identified are hero, scapegoat, and mascot and lost child. Those are the primary ones she identified. And they're different in the narcissistic family, which is its own type of dysfunctional family. And so the roles that she identified quickly became adopted by people, psychologists writing about any kind of dysfunctional family. Any addiction, families dominated by any kind of addiction, mental illness, narcissism, and so on. The narcissistic family is a little bit different. There, of course, is the scapegoat. There's also the golden child, and the golden child. And the map and the lost child in larger families. Typically, the golden child and scapegoat emerge. They're sort of the primary roles that happen. So if it's a smaller family, if there are two kids, for example, it's more likely that the kids will primarily play those two roles. And in terms of the roles, it's not, it's not cut and dried. The children can sort of shift around in different types of, experiencing different roles throughout any given day or time period, depending on the narcissistic parent fluctuating moods and the situation going on at home. But in general, kids tend to fall into consistent patterns in consistent roles that kind of are sort of overarching definition for how the kid try to manage in the crazy narcissistic family dynamics. And a lot of it is thrust upon them by the dominant narcissist in the family. Often there can be two narcissistic parents, or a dominant narcissist and a codependent parent is typically how it happens. And the reason there is that there's this golden child variation on the hero role, so that it becomes more complicated in the narcissistic family because the roles are determined. Those two roles, scapegoat and golden child, are kind of reflections of the narcissistic parent or parent, their own kind of inner drama. So their projection of the repressed, shamed self in the narcissist, and then the idealized, grandiose, superior self. So the scapegoat carries that repressed shame of this narcissistic parent, and the golden child reflects their idealized, grandiose self. And in some sense, everyone in the narcissistic family ends up becoming, to some extent, a projection of the narcissist, because they're so self-absorbed and everything is filtered through their own insular, myopic reality. And people become, just it's kind of like a hall of mirrors is how I've written about it at times. And the narcissist is seeing versions of themselves wherever they go. And there are many cognitive distortions that go along with that. But we can talk more about that later.
As far as the narcissist and the scapegoat goes, I guess, is the scapegoat all of the negative things that the narcissist doesn't like about themselves?
Yeah, so it's certainly often the case that the scapegoat is experiencing projection of the rejected self, the parts of the self that the narcissistic parent, hates or is uncomfortable with or is ashamed of, essentially. So the shamed, buried, repressed self, that child self that gets repressed, and sort of replaced by the dominant, grandiose persona. So, and it's not just the scapegoat takes the heat, but the scapegoat takes the blame for when things go wrong in the family, when somebody loses a job, or anything bad that's happening, anybody having a bad day. It somehow gets distorted into the scapegoat somehow carries the responsibility for anything negative going on in the family. And it's astonishing how things the narrative gets twisted around to hold the scapegoat responsible and accountable for the family's anger, for their disappointment, for large and small negative in life. And that, really pushed, that's driven largely by the dominant narcissistic parent. And often people siblings scramble around. They don't necessarily even understand why the scapegoat is being blamed, but often they're just trying to avoid being targeted themselves. So they're willing to go along with the narrative. And especially younger siblings aren't even really able to understand why the scapegoat is being targeted. They don't understand really what's going on. All they know is, I don't want to be targeted myself.
Because I assume in many instances, let's say the scapegoat is 4 years older than the next child, by the time the child is, aware of things or maybe has a possibility of understanding things, they might be 8 years old and the scapegoat is 12 now. And it's, entirely possible, they grew up in it. So for them, it's a normality of what is kind of going on. And it's very difficult to understand the actual breakdown of everything, since you are the one that is younger. If you were older, I could understand that it's possible that you do understand what's going on, but for a younger one, I assume that it's very difficult to understand anyone's role.
Absolutely. And it's just kind of, It's just how my family works that I think is how younger kids experience it. It's like, okay, yeah, that sibling is to blame. That sibling did something wrong. I don't know what it was, but this is just our normal in our family. This is how things work. And it's extremely isolating for the scapegoat. It's just constant, unjust, experience of having justice being violated.
So when it comes to the scapegoat, there is a lot of variables into what makes them tick when they are older, what issues they may or may not have. And they can go in many ways. And, you can see them become a hero, a caretaker for other people because of what they had to endure when they were younger. And a lot of the time, they deal they're the ones in the family that fight back. They're the truth tellers in these situations, because they're the ones that actually stand up to the narcissistic parent, and then they get in the most trouble, which puts them at odds. But I also find there are scapegoats, because they have different functionalities, that when I listen to them in my other podcast, that they've been so kind of beaten down by everything. There's a lot of loss of functionality that goes on as well. So are you able to explain a little bit about the functionality and maybe the variables that kind of take place, and how they might be able to recover from this in the future?
Sure. Yeah. It's so, it does encompass, it can encompass lots of sort of different ways of trying to adjust and cope with having this responsibility in the family. So the scapegoat, why a child is chosen sort of as the scapegoat, there are many, many reasons. There are many possible reasons to be selected as the scapegoat. It can be as simple as gender. It can be, what particularly going on in the family at a certain time, and the oldest child then becomes targeted. It can be personality issue. Sometimes the child who is most like the narcissistic parent in certain respects is chosen because the narcissistic parent is uncomfortable with the aspects of their personality, and they see that reflected in that particular child. So they target that child. So it's a range of reasons. And as you said, it's often what happens is the child is targeted as scapegoat because they're the one who is, who's speaking out against the dysfunction and injustice in the family. So they're the ones who maybe are questioning the narcissistic parents the most. They're questioning the family narrative. They're perhaps defending other siblings, or possibly defending their other parent. And so they're become, kind of in the line of fire with the dominant narcissist. So, often the scapegoat is selected because they are, for whatever reason, most aware, most empathetic toward the, other people in the family who are being abused, or more, having more strong, independent-minded personality. Those are often the kids who get targeted. And it's a complicated role. It can include, it can overlap with caregiving, caretaking. It can overlap with the hero role, which is the more traditional role that was identified by Sharon Wegg-Sider-Cruz as being, one of the primary roles in dysfunctional families. So that there can be kind of, I think of it as kind of a hero scapegoat role, which I haven't heard people talking about, but I've I wrote about it in my book, and I've experienced it, and I know many others that I've spoken with have also experienced versions of this, where you play, you take responsibility for family. For example, you may be doing chores, you may be doing caretaking of a parent or both parents. You may be, pushing yourself to excel. And sometimes you're pushing yourself to excel against the expectations of failure, or perhaps you're the hero and you're pushing, you're playing that hero role where you're representing success for the family and you're a source of pride, but you're also more independent minded. You're trying to protect, that other parent or your siblings or some other family member. And so you become targeted then. So you start out maybe more in the hero caregiver role, and that can shift into being more scapegoated. So I see it as kind of a possible hybrid that happens. It's something that or you can experience different roles in different homes. If you're, for example, if it's a situation of divorce, there can be children may play slightly different roles in each home, depending on the dynamics with the parents and possibly step parents and a step sibling for that matter.
I guess a big conundrum for a lot of people is with the scapegoat can become a narcissist themselves as they grow older, and they take on, I guess, a victim role. And for parents out there who, I guess, are in co-parenting situations or still in these situations and noticing patterns within their children, is there anything a parent can do to, when they notice these patterns of a scapegoat, to eventually try and move them away, to eventually, because they don't want them becoming a narcissist in the future?
Well, absolutely. I mean, any child in this dynamic is vulnerable to adopting a narcissistic. I think of it as it could be, it's a coping mechanism. Narcissism itself is a coping mechanism that is kind of established very early on in childhood, very early, and then over time becomes increasingly entrenched. And so any child in this circumstance is vulnerable to adopting that, most children in this circumstance are going to feel they're experiencing shame. There's so much shame in the narcissistic family, and all of the children are struggling with that. And sure, the scapegoat can take on the narcissistic defense and behavior pattern. I think that if I were to say who would be most likely to take on the narcissistic personality, I would probably say it would be the golden child. But it certainly happens that the scapegoat develops that too. But the arrogance and the entitlement that happen with the golden child can tend to create that narcissistic personality going forward. But yeah, the scapegoat is certainly beaten down, and they may, take on narcissism, or they may become codependent. And often when the scapegoat becomes highly codependent, and there can be so much villainizing and or pathologizing of that child, that they can even, they're most apt to have complex post-traumatic stress, and which can persist, for decades, and unless there's some kind of intervention, and they are, and the CPTSD can encompass so many different things, and we can talk about that if you'd like.
You touched on codependency, and a big thing in my opinion, when talking to people on the show, is the relationship between the parents. And are both parents narcissist, or is one parent the codependent and one parent the narcissist, and how that relationship dynamic work, and how it works when it comes to children, especially when it comes to trust. And is there a way to kind of explain when one parent is a codependent and the other is a narcissist, is how the children are viewed by the codependent parent?
The codependency and the narcissism, and this may be hard for people to hear. I don't know. I see those things as kind of being on the same continuum. So, people who grow up in a narcissistic family environment, they learn narcissistic and or codependent behavior patterns from their parents, and there's some overlap there. Codependents and narcissists share some underlying traits. They're driven by shame. Although the codependent is usually a lot more self-aware about it. It's not repressed as it is for the narcissist. Codependent invest in their partner. There's dependency. And that's also true of the narcissist, if we think about that. The narcissist would never admit it, but they're extremely dependent and codependent on others for their psycho-emotional survival.
Before you continue, is this why a lot of people, after they're out of a relationship with a narcissist, where they start questioning themselves, am I the narcissist, even though they're codependent? Is this the reason? Is that one of the reasons they always say that? Because I'm sure I've said it myself.
It's probably partly what's going on there. It can be very confusing. Because there's the underlying shame, there's heavy identification in the relationship, there are poor boundaries, so those are some of the overlapping issues. And it can be confusing. I think it's when we're narcissist, when we're steeped in that kind of environment, having grown up in it, for example, or being in a long-term relationship with a narcissist, I think it's kind of inevitable to wonder, to question ourselves. But although it's been written otherwise, I think that just asking yourself, am I the narcissist, is pretty much evidence that you're not the narcissist. It's still the self-reflection that codependents are more likely to do, that is just not happening with the narcissistic personality. They don't self-reflect. They do anything to self-reflect. That is a defining feature of the personality type. It's the personality profile. It is that is one of the number one things the narcissist avoid is self-reflection. So there's such little self-awareness. It's a danger. It's a danger to the whole persona.
When I talk to people and their parents, they always felt one of their parents was codependent and one of their parents was a narcissist. And after the parents get divorced, there has been a trend in which I've seen where the parent that they thought was codependent, it turns out, is also exhibiting narcissistic behavior after the fact, when they are now by themselves and don't have someone else to be dominant over them, and they were just submissive to that narcissist's needs. But in reality, it turns out that they were both that way. It just took sometimes for people like 20 years, because that's how long their marriage was for these children to finally see these things. Is that something that is common, or is that?
That's such a good question, interesting issue, and I think part of that is maybe a situation where you have a more overt, domineering narcissist in the family, and then the partner is perhaps more covert, but also a narcissist. But they've maybe played the safer parent role. They've not been so aggressive. They've been under the radar with a lot of their narcissistic issues, and they've enjoyed perhaps playing that role where they were the more overt version of the narcissistic parent is playing the heavy role, the jerk, the aggressive, domineering, obvious narcissist. And that other parent is, really cultivating an image in relation to that, as being the more understanding, caring, kind, whatever it is. And often that's really a covert, a person who really does also for narcissistic issues and is just more covert about it. But there's also the sort of bigger picture, which is for kids, which is it's terrifying. It's an untenable reality to have two narcissistic parents, to see yourself in that dynamic. The really obvious dominant narcissist is acting out in extraordinary ways that can be, are usually, there's a lot of rage involved. There can be physical and sexual abuse. There's certainly emotional abuse and ridicule and, hypercriticism. So we tend, as children, to try to preserve the other parent who's less aggressive and less scary as the safe parent, because we desperately, of course, need a safe parent. And so we often, and this is our normal too. So we're growing up in this environment. We don't know what a loving, accepting, consistent parent is, what that looks like. So the parent who's less obviously narcissistic is generally considered the non-narcissist, whether they are or not. Does that make sense?
Yes. And just to kind of bring everything around, because, we were talking about the codependent parent who possibly could be a covert narcissist. When in relation to being a scapegoat, if a scapegoat becomes a narcissist or eventually, evolves into that, is it most likely that they would become a covert narcissist because of the victim playing?
Yeah, I would agree with you about that. Because the scapegoat is filed, so if they're developing a narcissistic coping style themselves, they haven't been given permission to draw attention to themselves, to have that larger than life personality. It's not safe for them to do that in the family environment as the scapegoat. So that the narcissistic personality is going to be more covert. They're going to be more, that's going to be less obvious because it's simply not something. It's not a defense they can kind of mount in the family. They're not given that space to do that the way the golden child is, for example.
I have some questions here from people that from our audience that sent in some stuff. So do you want to answer some questions?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. So the first one on my list, it says, I was the golden child of my family, and 4 years ago, my scapegoat brother went no contact with all of us. Since then, I become the target of my father, and now I understand what my brother had to deal with. I want to talk to him and repair our relationship, but he won't have anything to do with me. Any suggestions about what I should do?
It's so tough. And, being fractured family, this to me is one of the tragedies of the narcissistic family, is that siblings are pitted against each other in nature. Those relationships are eroded. Some siblings come out of it okay. They're able to somehow rally together and have closeness and loyalty despite the toxic influence from the parent. So it's a really tough thing when the scapegoat breaks away. And the scapegoat really does need to break away because it's not safe and it's so relentlessly negative for that child. And especially in relation to a golden child, a child who's played that role of golden child. I mean, they're so pitted against each other, and there's such a profound injustice happening there. And for the scapegoat, it is a matter of survival to get away from the family, from the family dynamic, and break away and try to repair the damage and try to establish healthier relationships away from the family of origin. And so in terms of reaching out to that sibling, I think it really depends on the particular situation, the particular timing. It's possible that sibling may be open to an overture if it's made in a way that demonstrates that former golden child is aware of the profound injustice and the pain that scapegoated sibling has gone through. I mean, you have to kind of approach that sibling with acknowledgement of the role that they've played. And the tricky part of it here is that person, I'm assuming they're adults at this point, that a formerly scapegoated person is maybe not aware of it. That it's such a long journey in terms of our own understanding of what we've been through. And so that scapegoated kid or now adult is not, it depends on how aware they are of how receptive they may be to an overture from a sibling. But I do think in general, the scapegoated child is desperately wanting overtures from others, whether it's parents or siblings, other family members. I mean, they are often so isolated, so alone, painfully isolated, and not acknowledged and not validated, profoundly invalidated in this family structure. And so I guess in general, I would encourage siblings to reach out to one another. And I want to say too that everybody suffers. Everybody suffers in this family kind of stuff. Everyone is unsafe. Everyone is playing an artificial role. They're not given permission to develop their authenticity, to be whoever they are. That's one of the sort of underlying rule that the narcissistic parent or parents, they determine who the kids are to some degree, into a large degree. They dictate the narrative for the family. So I encourage siblings to try to repair the damage and try to reach out, but understand that the scapegoated child is so wounded, and being sensitive to that.
Listening to you in your answer to the question, I'm sitting here. It's just sad. It's just so sad. It's like all, it just, I have tears in my eyes listening to your answer, because just, I can feel, you can just feel the situation no matter who has gone through it or what they're going through. it's just so tremendously sad, the fracturedness of everything. And, knowing what a healthy and loving family can be for such people. And it's just not for so many people out there. And it's just so unfair.
Yeah, I know. It's just kind of, but to me, the separations and the fragmentation of the sibling relationship is one of the most profound tragedies in all this. Because we need each other the most. I mean, we are, if you've grown up with in the kind of family, that part of the experience, one of the hardest parts of the experience is the isolation and the lack of understanding from others outside the family. If you haven't lived with narcissism firsthand, it's virtually impossible to conceive of. It's insane. It's horrifying. And so that's another isolating component of it. And when then you're also isolated from your own family members in this scenario, it's even more painful and destabilizing. And what I hope for families and what I hope for my clients and my readers is that they will find ways back to each other to repair the damage and find the connections with family members, with siblings, especially. But it's so difficult because we all come out of it with our own damage and our own confusion and our own trauma. And there are so many confusing messages and lies in the family about who everyone is, the role they've played. And there are, the narcissistic parents really often fuel the flame of conflict and lack of empathy among siblings, and the beliefs that kids end up having about each other are often so off base, so false.
I see. I grew up in a dysfunctional home, and I won't say it was a narcissistic household. It was a dysfunctional home. And the one thing I say to myself to today is I feel robbed of close sibling relationships. And not that I don't have a certain relationship with some of my siblings now, but when I was younger, I said this before on another podcast, I was a stranger to them. And you didn't have this closeness. You had more of a fear or just a distrust of everyone, that you didn't want to open up and you didn't want to share. And it was not a family environment in that sense. And it's something I will never be able to experience, being robbed of that, especially in your youth, when you want to look up to your older siblings and, want to feel taken care of and things along those lines. And you just don't have that. And there just wasn't any infrastructure in place for that at all. And it's the one thing, if anything, that I'm truly sad about is that you had these kids that could have been this great loving pack, but instead they were just really strangers living in the same home.
Yeah, and that is all. That it really is one of the fundamental kind of defining features of a dysfunctional family, where the parents' needs are paramount. The parents' needs override the needs of the children, and part of that, the divide and conquer that happens in the narcissistic family, or other types of dysfunctional families, addictive families, for example, or even like religious extremism, where that dominates the family. There's the insistence on secrecy. There's denial. the more dysfunction there is, the more corresponding denial of the dysfunction there is. And so kids generally are not able to, talk to one another about what's happening. It's not safe. There's not, there's no acknowledgement of what's really happening. And sadly, everyone's normal. But yeah, I agree. It's one of the true tragedies is the breakdown of the sibling connection. And if there's any way to rebuild, it's one of the ways to recover. But that requires being in it's a tricky situation though in adulthood when we try to reach out, if we try to reach out to those siblings, because we're all coming from different perspectives and we've all been through our own version of hell and we're all at different stages of recovery or non-recovery, and of self-awareness and lack thereof. So, I think that probably in many cases, I think speaking from a student point of view, I was kind of a weird hybrid of a scapegoat hero in my family situation. And it was a complicated one because there was divorce and there were different homes involved and stuff, siblings and stuff. But that I would say that the scapegoat often feels very much wanting siblings to reach out, very much wanting that, needing that. But and sometimes the golden child, and that is often, as the questioner put it, often that is the scenario is where a former golden child who then is scapegoated then becomes aware. And that's how the awareness can happen for the golden child. And that's where the golden child may reach back then and really take a hard look at what really happened in the family. And it can shift how you see things, and it can certainly shift how you see your scapegoated sibling. So I think reaching out with awareness and a lot of sensitivity and acknowledgement of the pain is kind of the best approach.
Well, Julie L. Hall, thank you for being part of our show. And people can find your book on Amazon and I guess all retailers, which is The Narcissist in Your Life, Recognizing the Patterns and Learning to Break Free. And they can also find you at narcissistfamilyfiles.com, which is your website. And before we leave, do you have any parting words?
I just want to say thanks so much, Brandon. It was fun talking with you. And people can find my writing on my website, narcissistfamilyfiles.com. I have tons of articles that I've written over the last few years. I'm on HuffPost. I'm on Psychology Today. You can find me there. I have a blog, ongoing blog there. And you can find my book in independent bookstores near you, as well as the big meme. So yeah, the book came out last month. You can find lots of my writing, articles and books. They're out there. I hope they help. And do reach out. I encourage listeners to reach out if you're interested in coaching or consulting help from me as well.
Well, I just want to thank you once again for helping people out today. This was a very valuable episode for people to learn from, and hopefully it's comforting for a lot of people who are the scapegoats to understand more about yourself. So on behalf of myself and Julie L. Hall, thank you very much for listening today, and I hope you have a good night.